Hey everybody, welcome to episode 30. I'm Ken Pooch Van Druten, and
This is Chris Rabold.
Chris Rabold. How are you, sir?
I am Chris Rabold.
I am.
That's enough of an answer.
Rabold.
I'm all right. I'm good enough.
So tell me, man, you got to do a gig. Holy crap.
Yeah. Rabold does a gig.
Rabold does a gig, which is amazing. Yep. The rest of us are super jealous right now. In fact, I've caught myself a bunch of times like scrolling through Instagram and seeing somebody, doing a gig, or they're like, oh yeah, I'm doing, setting up for such and such. And I'm like super jealous. I'm like,
oh, totally. And I thought about this week. I posted a few times and I'm like, I know so many people are looking at me being like, man, you douche. Like, don't brag. But I try to, it's with gratitude and like giddiness. Totally. I mean, and that from the bottom of my heart,
I don't mean that in a horrible way. Like I wish them harm. I'm just saying, I'm like, oh man, I wish I had a gig, right now.
Totally.
But, that's neat that you got to do that. So I thought that maybe for this one, for the big 30, that's 30 hours of stuff that we've just pontificated about. Isn't that amazing?
It really is.
But I thought for this one, for episode 30, that maybe we just talk a little bit about how that gig went. Maybe a little bit about COVID, like how was the check-in process and like all of that kind of stuff. Because I think guys will be interested and gals will be interested in how that all may look coming up. And then let's talk about the gig and how it was and, all those kind of things. So I don't know. Start us off. Tell us what was the gig? Tell us what it was.
So first of all, the gig was, it was through PRG VER.
Yep.
And Chance Stallhut, much like you and I mobilized quickly with this whole thing once COVID hit, once we got the idea that, hey, we're going to be here for a minute, let's do something. He quickly mobilized, and perhaps maybe it was already in their plans, I don't know, but they turned their Nashville warehouse, effectively part of it, into a soundstage. So bands can come in, and them being a 360 company, they've got everything, Artists can come in, they could stream, they could just tape. I mean, we did both this week. The stream, that's a good story, was oh, by the way, like 2 hours before we hit. They're like, nah, we're going to do this one live. And
whoa,
which was
really?
Cool.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was it. So Chance called and said, hey man, do you want to come do this? And effectively what I was the A1. So I was the broadcast mixer for this, which is different for me because while you and I talk about sending mixes to broadcast, and both of us have been in the chair and in an advisory role for our respective artists with the broadcast mixers. I mean, I have been a broadcast mixer in the fact that I was sending it, but never in that it's me with the 8 bands coming through and their representatives and that whole thing. I've never sat down as that before. So it was cool. And it was also, because it was different, there was an element that was like, ooh, it's kind of put up or shut up time. And I got to tell you, I thought a lot about the stuff that you and I have spoken about here. That quadrupled the it's put up or shut up time. Awesome. And so that was it. So I was the A1, I was the broadcast mixer. Ultimately, aside from that one stream, we were just tracking. Massive, gigantic, biggest shout out I could possibly manage to Chris Diener, who is a production manager, front of house engineer, total badass out of Nashville. Works with Kelsey Ballerini is his primary act. He was would never even use the word assistant. He was the other engineer in the room. I mean, gotcha. I didn't touch Pro Tools other than he had 2 redundant rigs running. I didn't touch it other than to loop a section I wanted to listen to. So cool. In a nutshell, that's what it was. Does that paint a fairly...
It does. Yeah. So there's all kinds of questions that I get from all of that, but yeah, that paints the picture for sure. So the question becomes, what was that like for dudes, like were there front of the house guys showing up and like, you know, kind of in a, you being the broadcast guy and you being the guy saying, well, you can have this fader. Did that happen?
Yeah.
Or was it?
I didn't have nearly as, yes, but not to the extent you would at, you know, the Grammys or whatever. Not nearly. I think I had a few management types that strolled in. And that was, you know, definitely because it was really loose and it was just such a good vibe in there. I mean, I was just having a blast. Once I got it going, and I'll talk a little bit about that, I was just having a good time. And then every now and again, someone would stroll in. I'd be like, oh, right, professional, you know, and have to play the role. And which was great. And I had one guest engineer who came in, and they were the only act that day. So we had all day long to talk and to converse and set the stage. It was very chill. And he had just a couple of little notes on a couple songs, like, oh, on this one, you got to pull this up on the track, or, you know, it was super chill. So it wasn't, I was prepared for all of that, but there wasn't a ton of that. So I kind of lucked out on that end, you know?
So, you know how we've spoken a lot about how to manage ourselves. We've talked a lot about on this channel to, you know, handle yourself appropriately and speak to people with respect and, you know, don't be a dick, basically. You know, we've said that a bunch of times in different videos. Did you have anybody comes in like guns a-blazing?
I did. I had, and it was happened to be on the day that maybe wasn't Chris's best day, if you know what I'm saying. So basically what we did was, I was in a room, God, I don't know, a football field away. I mean, I was a long way away. And what we did was I piped my mix back to Filet Mignona, who was doing monitors, except for the couple people that had maybe had their own guy with them. But I sent my mix back to him, and he sent it to a pair. It was like 3 Meyer Leopards or some smaller Meyer box over a couple Meyers. It was just something to fill the room.
Totally get it.
More, get it right, just for reference. And so I said, now that was different because I'm big on, I don't do a lot of solo and play so much as when I'm mixing, particularly when I'm building, I do a ton of muting. And I knew what acts didn't have somebody in the room. I knew when I couldn't get away with it. Yeah. But there was a few times where I was like, shit, I can't do my normal stuff because it's going in there. So on this one day, we had our first, what kind of resembled a rock band. And it was just different than what we'd been doing. And I basically was not concerned about putting that vocal on top till the very end. I was building my mix. So this is take one. And if you also remember in us talking here, I say when I'm in the truck with someone, or if I'm in front of house with someone, or in any of these things, I don't say shit during the first pass, because guess what? I just handed them the building blocks. Like, what can you realistically expect? So I kind of built this thing, was kind of not struggling, but it wasn't coming together quite as much. And the vocal was like on, but just not really on. And then immediately following that performance, I get a, hey, is the PA where it's gonna be? Oh my God. And it's like, yeah, well, you know, really just the vocal. And I'm just like, because, you know, and I'm like, who's they? You know, of course, I start going there, knowing nobody can hear me but the guy I'm talking to.
Yeah.
And I realize what's happening. That happened to coincide with me. I use this week as a big learning experience, like we always should with everything. And I tried different game structures. I came in with one plan, then bailed from it, then was like, well, shit, I've got 3 shots left. Let's go back. So ultimately the whole thing was 5 dB quieter. And I didn't make up for that on the send to the PA. So there was a number of things that made it happen. But anyway, then the manager type does come walking in the room later. And I gotta be honest with you, man, it wasn't Irving Azoff walking in that room. And I knew that. It wasn't the most powerful person in the music business. And I said, hey, bud, Chris Rabold, nice to meet you. I was like, you're going to have exactly what you want in just a second. What you heard was me putting I went way further than I needed to, if I'm being honest.
Yep.
And with a little bit of snippiness. And
well, a little bit of alpha pup, right? Like you were blowing up a little bit. Like, hey, listen, dude, you got to give me a pass in order to get it even close. And the fact that you're such a douchebag that you came to me after the first pass, I'm going to show you.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And it shows me that he doesn't know. And it was apparent walking in where he was kind of like, ooh, you know, I'm like, so did I handle it the right way? Kind of. You know what I mean? Yeah. But and then I quickly got it. And to the band's credit, they were the only band that came in there to listen. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. And they were like, yeah, man, you're cool. So yeah, that was the only moment where I kind of sort of stepped out of character / kind of planted a foot and let them know, hey, buddy, this is how this works. You know, but again, was it our manager walking in the room? No, it was not. I knew who I was talking to. Would I have said that to our manager? No, I would have not. But I would have said something slyly similar with less attitude, you know?
Totally. This is a perfect example of what we always talk about reading the room, right? Mm-hmm. And making decisions about how deep, deep of a dive do we go here? By, you know, because all of this is psychology, right? Like you immediately, the dude walked in, you saw that he wasn't Irving Azoff, that he was just a guy that really didn't know what was happening. You needed to, you know, kind of let him know that, you know, this is how it works. You got to give me more than one pass to get the thing right. I think all of that stuff is valid. It's about figuring out what's appropriate, right? You know, we talk about this all the time where, you know, you didn't like go after the guy. You weren't like, you know, listen, dude.
Not at all.
No,
not at all.
But you did it the right way in showing him that, hey, man, you know, that, listen, you know, for future reference, just so you know, that's really what you were saying to him.
And I also acknowledged his concern because, like, I get it. If I get it. The vocal was low. Like, hey man, I hear what you're saying. Like, you know, so there was some acknowledgement of not saying you're wrong.
Totally.
But.
Yep. Not saying you're wrong, but you're wrong. But yeah, I mean, you know, that is, and that's tough sometimes because your ego gets in the way. I know my ego does. Like immediately I start, you know, especially if I am in a room with someone that I perceive like really doesn't know what's going on, and they're treating me like I'm the douchebag, then my ego, I, you know, immediately just go, okay, dude, I'm about to just crush you, turn you into, you know.
Yeah. It's hard not to react. Now, all that being said, again, because it's so different, because I'm feeding the room, I've kind of lost sorts with that. I won't make that mistake again as best I can. So even Mr. High and Mighty, let me tell you how it is. Hey man, I learned something. Just like the guy that comes up and tells you certain section doesn't sound very good at a show and you get kind of pissy and then you're like, there's probably a shred of truth in that. There was some of that in the, you know.
You know, it's funny. I actually did a Linkin Park thing that was like a karaoke. It was in one of these like Sony studio where they shoot movies, right? And so you know, they invited like some karaoke kids, you know, to come see this thing, and also some kids were there for like sound check and whatever. And so I experienced exactly what you experienced the first day. I'm a serious solo and place guy, man. I'm like all the time, like listening to things individually, pulling things down, muting things, checking things individually, whatever. I am not. I talk about. Yeah, I am not a listen to the big picture when I'm getting started for almost the entire first day, right? And I had exactly the same problems, like people coming in and going, well, you know, the speakers out there are like turning on and off, and so. And I had to like figure out a way how to get them it's a bullshit mix. It's not real, but it was a feed from all of my shit even when I was muting things and solo and placing things. And I forget how I did it. But it was really convoluted. Like I had to figure out a group in the group in the group and all this kind of shit just to appease the numbnuts out there that there was a full amount of stuff coming out of speakers. They didn't care what it sounded like. They just didn't want it to change. They wanted it to be, and so I feel for you. It's like, it's something when you're put in that situation, you'll probably never do again. You'll figure out a way so that you don't have to deal with that. Right.
I will, or I'll just commit to, it's like, hey, that's what it is. That's the challenge of this gig, totally. And I couldn't hear the PA. Like I listened to it when we put it up.
I know.
And then, I had no fucking clue what was going on out there.
I know.
I was surprised that it didn't. And I said this when we set it up. I was like, guys, this thing is going to feed back, even at a low level. And the reason I say that is one of the coolest things about that gig this weekend is I stomped every vocal as hard as I could within the realm of not completely sucking up the noise floor into it because there was no feedback for me.
That's
so
awesome.
I laughed so hard. My vocal chain, it had a CLA 76 to blue stripe on it.
Yeah.
And I would look at it and I'd be like, talking about Christina, I'd be like, Chris, look at that. And it would just be like, just would never leave,
awesome.
Just full on stun. And it didn't. I had some acoustic, we had to mic a few acoustic instruments, and those I could hear start to get a little, little squirrely in the room.
Yeah.
But all the vocals stayed pretty solid. They're very solid, completely solid. So,
that's so much fun. That's so much fun when you get in that situation.
Oh, I had so much reverb. I mixed with more verb than I have ever mixed with because I could do it. I could do it. I could hear it. And, you watch, and having sat in broadcast 7 million times on my own, I know that is also a good way to homogenize and somewhat even out your mixes that you're spinning up fast, is to kind of paint them with this gloss, and so I used that. And even when it made my drum kit too verby, it was still fun. It was, I learned a lot in innumerable ways over the course of the past week. So, but
awesome.
Stomping the vocal was a big one. That was a big one.
Yeah. I love when you get in those situations, and guys, I think we've talked about in the past about we don't change our mixes so much, for broadcast in a normal kind of situation. But when you're mixing for broadcast, then you can do stuff like that. You can make decisions that are like decisions that you might make in a recording studio versus a live situation in order to make a vocal sound great by just squashing the hell out of it. Yeah.
And a couple times, thinking about things that you and I have spoken about, and also just thinking about, okay, what if I do it my normal way? Like I'm usually, unless it's a screamer, in live shows, my vocals, God, there's some people, if they just don't sing loud, it might be my finger in 1 to 2 dB all night. But on average, I'd say I'm a 3 to 5, maybe a 7 if it's a super fast, if it's a distressor or an 1176, it'll grab a peak.
Right.
But it's usually just needle barely moving. So there was one act that came through. And I was like, no, I'm going to do my normal. This is when I was feeling myself, and I knew I was in a good spot, and I knew either way I'd be okay. And I did a couple shows or a couple gigs or a couple whatever tapings where I didn't hit it as hard just to do it,
Sure. And just to see what it is.
Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you one thing I did do. I usually we've talked about our vocal chains, and I say I'll put an EQ at the end, and I'm just like touching high end on those just to kind of bring it back. Well, ultimately, usually what I'm doing is cutting way more low mids, everything but the high man. I cut a lot more in a live show. So the resultant effect is essentially a big boost. But I feel safer cutting than I do adding the boost. On this one, I was just adding the boost. So even though it's the same thing, it felt safer. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like doing that live, I feel like if I'm pushing into 5K, I'm pushing into feedback. Really, I'm doing the same thing by cutting all the low stuff and just adding gain. So I kind of just did things different.
I think it is a different sound. I know, we're talking about the
It
same
is.
thing, like cutting versus boosting. It
Yes.
is a different sound only because you're adjusting the gain part of that, right? So the interaction that happens with the mic pre is different in a boosting situation than it is in a cutting situation, because you're boosting the gain in a cutting situation, you're cutting the gain down in a boosting situation. And so it does change the overall result, I think. But yeah, I mean, in principle, what you're saying is true, but I think it really is a different result, especially over an entire mix of channels. Did you find that was happening? Like it?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I've become more, for the longest time, I was so into subtractive EQ. And I don't want to be like, I'm so over that now. But, I was like,
I'm a booster now.
Yeah. I'm a big boy.
I'm a big boy.
I still inherently, when I hear an input, I look for what bothers me first. Like I just do. And I used to really mainly only, like with drums would be the only place where I'd really boost a lot. And I've gotten more into boosting, but as a creative means, meaning even if I still got the same, like what we're talking, like there is the difference, particularly if it's a colored EQ. Now it happens to be on my vocal on this one. I know people like it when we talk gear. It was just a Renaissance EQ. It was a good old Ren EQ6. That thing has never failed me, man. That was my EQ on Beyonce. That was my EQ on freaking you name it, and it's worked great. So that is not a colored EQ, but particularly on a colored EQs, like boost sound different. So I've gotten a lot in my guitars. I used to always just cut what I didn't like and maybe put a touch of EQ. Now I'm all like, just getting there with the API or something and go to town and make it sound like something. So yes, I did find that was, it was really only in vocals where that was kind of different for me. God, it's so much easier there to just be like, where is it? And just turn the thing and go, 4.7. That's what we're boosting now. Cool. That sounds good.
Isn't that amazing that we don't realize how much we're handcuffed as live sound engineers in some ways? Like, whenever I work on a project where I'm mixing in my studio, or like an example like this in broadcast, I notice that there are definitely things like exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, there's no way that I could get away with that with, a 270 huge PA and a thrust. There's no way that I could totally get away with what I'm doing. So it does change your thought process a little bit, but I think it changes it for the easier. Like we always talk about how a live sound engineer and a studio engineer are kind of merging. It is almost the same job. And what we're, putting out of a live sound console is, a record mix that we'd be proud of. But the flip side of that is a recording engineer coming to a live sound situation wouldn't know that he couldn't do all of those things that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
And for us, it's like, well, this is so much easier. All I have to do is add a bunch.
It was great. And like, we were in we were in like a makeshift control room. It was literally like their break room that they had put up a bunch of pipe and drape, and they had done, man, those guys were so fucking awesome. They did so many things to make it better. At one point I was saying, even my little, not so big PA, it was kind of, I like to listen in a studio environment. I like to listen. We've talked about this. I have like a loud volume, and then I have a soft volume. And a lot of times it's the soft volume where you can really judge your impact, and definitely your balance.
Right.
So whenever I'd go to low volume, though, I could still hear the room. Next thing I know, these guys are like wheeling out carts of those. What are those giant Meyer subs? You like them? The
1100s.
Yes. There was like walls of those around the door. I mean, everybody was being so great. So we were isolating like we could, but where I'm going with this was the room, we did the best we could with it, but it still had resonances in it. Like
totally get it.
I was still fighting a room, but 1/17 billionth to the degree that I would be fighting a live room. I mean, it was like, I wanted a sound. I just went, there it is. Or it's not going to happen. I know that with all my heart because I can hear it.
Yeah.
It really was kind of easier in that way. So, and the places where I did do things differently, I was definitely doing it all consciously and almost like, like having fun with it, because I know that's not the world that we typically live in.
Totally. What were you monitoring on as far as your near fields? What were you listening to?
Yeah, I took my JBL, I always screw up the names, the 708Ps. Years ago, I noticed, right? Yep. Years ago, I noticed whenever I went into not all, but definitely the greater majority of broadcast scenarios, whether it was a mobile truck, fixed studio, or a fly pack, they would have the predecessor to those, which were the JBL. I also screw these up. I think it was a 6328Ps or something like. It was the predecessor.
Okay.
And it was like the most generic broadcast speakers you could get. And they could get loud. They had low end. And I started thinking to myself, I'm like, well, man, if I'm making mixes in rehearsals, and then those mixes, maybe it's just stems of those mixes, maybe I'm giving them that mix. If they then go from rehearsals to broadcast, and then eventually they're going to translate to huge, that was the evolution of my monitoring path. I'm like, I'll just start with one thing and stick with that. And then in the tour, I'll still use it. And I swear to you, Pooch, I mean, this is not totally true. Of course you tweak. For the most part, if I mix on those things, it works from conception to the speakers.
Yeah, and I think that truly is, though, not necessarily the speaker. It's that that speaker so well in what it does. I always tell people, like, people ask me all the time, like, what speakers you're using, as if they're going to buy that pair of speakers and it's going to be something magic about those speakers, when really that's not the case. Although I understand the clarity on those speakers are amazing. I have a pair here in my studio right now, right over here, and they're right here. And I love them, and they're great. And I particularly like the high end sparkly bits because of that D2 driver, or whatever's in that thing. It's a great speaker. And it's the resolution of what's happening way up there is really good. But my point is that what it's about is choosing something that you use again and again, and you listen then on something else, car speakers, end user shit, iPhone, whatever. And you then realize, the next time that I work on my speakers, whatever manufacturer they are, I know that they translate a little bit mid-rangey, or they translate with too much high end, or, whatever. And a couple of times of that, and you can really, it doesn't matter what the speaker is, right? Like, you're going to train yourself.
It's the same thing as these,
Yeah, exactly. It's
just a tool.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people all the time, it's like, it's not, it's not that the M50 sound the best. They are by no means the best sounding headphones, but they have, a quality to them that allows, number one, for low end. Their low end, to me, is real, and unlike any other headphone. Like, I can totally figure out like what's happening in my low mid to low end in these headphones. And then I've just learned the rest of it, right? An interesting fact, like, I have taken an M50 and put it through a smart rig and figured out what the curve is for an M50. And it's not what you think it is. It's not linear at all.
Yeah, no. Closed back headphones, it's impossible to find a linear response.
Yes. Yeah. And so, I'm not saying that they sound horrible, but I'm also not saying that they are not the $4,000 Audis or, whatever. Right. They're not those either. But what they are, for their price point, they show me exactly what's going on with my mix. And I've used them for years. And because of that, I also know what they're going to sound, what my mix sounds like in these, what it's going to sound like somewhere else. And that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, it's not about the gear. It's about learning learning what the gear is doing and what it ends up with in the end user part of that.
Yeah.
You know?
And like when I said, you know, when you're like, what speakers did you use? If anyone was like, here it comes, no one got excited about the JBL 708Ps. Like that's a utilitarian speaker that doesn't really sound like anything. I've smarted that and it's remarkably flat, but like that's what I'm talking about. It's just, you know, and talk about knowing everything that might be coming. The other reason that I use that speaker and I used its predecessor is it can get loud. So when the artist walks in and they want some whatever,
you want hype.
Yeah,
here you go.
You can go there with it. So I brought my own. We actually paired it with I hate mismatching sources, but we paired it with whatever that single driver L Acoustics sub is, which is not even a sub I like. But and I just did that to give it some bottom. I don't mix with the sub at home. Or really ever, even in rehearsals. I did it just in case somebody came in and wanted to hear some 808 drop, you know, but it wasn't necessary. So yeah, we did that. And
that's cool. I tend to, I have a pair of Genelecs that I like. They're the older 1032s.
I like the 10 series better than the whatever 8000.
But they don't get loud. So
that red light comes on quick.
Man, So I sit there and mix on those at a pretty low volume most of the time, but I always have whatever the small box of whatever the PA that I'm using for that artist, you know, is in there as well. So like when I do Iron Maiden, it's the 1032s, but it's also the CP6, you know, the small cohesion box with a pair of subs underneath them, so that when the band comes in and they want the hype, I can give it to them that I can't give it to them on the 1032s. But I got to be honest, I spend a great deal of time like on my Genelecs just because I know those, you know.
You know,
the back of my hand. So same thing. So was there tell us about any experiences you had with maybe new plugins that you liked or you tried, or maybe ones that you've used for a long time that you use differently, or was there any of that kind of stuff going on?
Well, I'll tell you what I did. And of course, me being me, I waited to the very last night before I left. And I sat here on the LV1 and I came up, you know, I'm always talking about gain structure. I'm always reinventing my gain structure, but only in what the targets are. It's always the same. Basically what I did was I came up with presets for my kick group, my snare group. I didn't do anything for toms. Overheads, the bass group. I kind of knew, I didn't have a preset for guitars, but I knew what my gain structure was going to be, and I made a vocal chain. So I took care of, that's so incredibly me too. I always make something for rhythm section and vocals. Those things always get. And so what I did was literally, and they were not subtle. I texted you one of them. They were not subtle EQs. I mean, it was like yank, yank, yank. I mean, so it was literally guys like paint by numbers. If I gained everything up to the right places and then fed them through these buses, I had a sound from the jump. And that was my goal. That's how I was going to get through this quickly. And I've also sat in broadcast long enough to be like, you know, when guys are mixing and I'm just like, hey, can we get a little, like, can we brighten that snare up a little? And a lot of times guys, a 57 on a snare, unless it's a great sounding snare, it's not a subtle boost I'm asking for. No. I mean, I'm saying crank that fucking thing, you know? So I just went ahead and pre-cranked. And I swear to God, it worked. Cool. So everything was just hitting the numbers, pushing it up. I had my parallel chain in. I'll give all this stuff to Wave so they can put them out too. And it was all gain matched and it was all really simple. So the only thing I did, what did I use? I used a ton of SS, you know, you and I talked about like in that, the CLA mix hub thing, you know, it does sound good.
It sounds really good.
It does. God,
I know.
And kills me. But I defaulted back to my good old, I know you like the G channel by default. I like the E by default. Yeah. And I kept going back to that one because it's a faker brightness than what the new
Yeah.
that mix up thing he does, but I kind of wanted it. So I just put like SSL channels on a lot of shit.
Yep.
My bass channel was stuff that I always use. I like a CLA. I like an LA2A rather. Quit saying CLA. I like an LA2A. It's just a good averaging compressor that once it gets, that we talked about it on a recent podcast, there's something magic in it. I had that into, I did get a new one here. I had that into like a Ren EQ, and then I messed with R bass a little just to give it some excitement. I had another, I can't believe I'm saying this. I was talking about how I usually do. I'm a slut. I usually have 3 bass channels. There's like the main brick of compression. It's like reverse parallel compression. There's the brick. Then there's the more dynamic one that sits under it. So the opposite of what you do for drums. But then I always have a distorted channel, whether it's a Sans amp or something else. Buddy was like, hey man, put that CLA bass thing on there. So again, I'm like, God damn it. Don't tell anyone, but okay, I'll try it.
Dude, that's so funny. People, get so lost in the artist series shit. Like, a lot of guys are like, I don't, that JJP thing has like, sparkle as a knob. Why are you using that? That's not
and you're talking about me right now. I'm that guy. I just refuse to go there, but the shit sounds good, man.
Dude, it does. I know. I tell people all the time.
You had that vocal thing. That sounded great.
Yeah.
What was that? That was a JJP thing, right?
It was, yeah. Jack Joseph Puig vocal, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the only thing you have to watch out for in Liveland is all of those artist series plugs are super latent, just because there's so much processing behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, dude, there's so much stuff. Like, I just saw some webcast with Andrew Sheps talking about his Omni, not the Omni channel, but what's the other one that looks like a
parallel
particles. Yeah. And he started to go down this rabbit hole of like what's happening behind the scenes of all of it. And it's like, I was like, what the fuck? That plugin has 4 knobs, but he's like, well, if you adjust one of these knobs, then it's going into a parallel compression. That's a parallel compression of this and the parallel compression to this. And the path is really 6 different aux sends. And I'm just like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And it's a great sounding plugin. I've used it in a bunch of places, but I didn't know that there was that much stuff happening like behind the scenes.
Right.
So anyway, that I just, I always tell people, like, check them out. You got to check out the artist series. There's some amazing tones going on there, but also be super aware of latency when you use it.
Yeah, and that one in particular, when I instantiated it, dude, there was like +8 gain on it. I'm like, okay, first of all, no, and what I ended up using on it was like, if there's 6 available sliders, I ended up using 2, and I was just trying to get that mid-range growl shit. So that was kind of an eye-opener. The other one, it was all my basic stuff, like C6 and the 1176s with the REQ at the end. But the one sort of eye-opener, I did 2 things. I've always used NLS stuff on and off and liked it and not liked it. For a minute, my parallel chain and drums was only in NLS pinned because, guys, that is compression. You don't see a meter moving. That is compression. And I AB'd the SSL, the 2500, the 1176, and the NLS, and I did that before I left. And I'm like, I like just the NLS on its own that is awesome. Compression. So it was gain matched. It was that into a pull tech. I usually don't follow it with an EQ. I just wanted to do something. In the end, I ended up throwing the I think I threw the 76s back on there, or maybe the 2500 just to do it. Again, gain matched. So that was fun. But the biggest eye opener of all is I got bored. In my main drum bus, I basically just ran drums A, which is my drums dry, through Super Rack, and then drums B, and put them in a latency group, checked it, and they lined up fine. So I was like, cool, we'll do that. But then I got bored, and I put this same thing that you and I played with that one day, that MDMX overdrive thing. I sat there and fucked with it, and I found this setting that just made the drum sound kind of modern and a little brighter. And I, on the front end of that, put an SSL. So my dry bus this was like the last day. I was like, I'm going to make this
Right.
the most in your face drum sound. So that was kind of a wow moment, you know, doing that. But other than that, it was real meat and potatoes. And I just used the Digico for virtually everything else, you know?
Yeah.
So if I needed a plus, like I need more, I'd throw an SSL channel on there. Pretty boring, pretty standard stuff, but it works.
I get it. I get it. I'm like, I'm that guy. I have been that guy for years, you know, oh yeah, SSL channel. And by the way, you know, I like the G channel, but it's only because I worked on E channel consoles, the real ones, for years and years and years. So I'm like, I don't want to use that. I want to use the new, I want to use the new shit. It's like totally, it's not because of how it sounds at all. It's because I'm like, you know, I used that for years. I don't want to, you know, look at that strip.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, you know, I learned, it's one of the things that I've learned from you, and I can't wait to incorporate into my workflow, is having that third drum bus and having it be something wacky like that, you know, MDMX thing or whatever it is, to kind of, you know, tighten up the other two things that are happening, adding some harmonic distortion and, you know, that kind of shit. That was never like on my radar before you started talking about it. And so now it's part of my workflow. Like I've been building mixes here and being like, oh, let's try that. And I've had a couple of successes with it. So thanks for that. That was good.
Yeah, for sure. What was I gonna say? No, it was funny. Well, no, go for it. I kind of lost the exact wording on what I was trying to say.
No, it's all good. So was there, tell us about the overall experience. Like what, first off, let's talk about the COVID, getting in the door every day. And what about like, you know, was there cleaning all the surfaces and like, tell us all about that. Like, what are we looking forward to? What that's going to turn into?
Well, I can tell you, I was in the middle of what that looked like there, which was very real and very thorough. And at the same time, I talked to Toby Francis, who's at the VMAs, and they're being like tested every day and put in bubbles. I mean, it was, what they were going through was even more hardcore. But what, you know, it's like intellectually, I knew what a gig during COVID would look like. I just hadn't experienced it. So I'd filled out all the paper. There's extensive paperwork, background checks, and all the things you'd expect. But then getting there on the actual gig day was quite surprising because there was a very extensive check-in process. And, you know, usually when you get to a gig, at most, you're handing your backpack to some totally disinterested security guard who, by opening it and looking at it, goes, here, when you could have 9 bombs in it, you know? And that's usually annoying and a pain in the ass. Well, this was like, backpack comes off, it goes through some car wash cleaning process. You don't see it for 15 minutes.
Wow.
There was some paperwork that you had to fill out every night. I didn't realize that at the beginning. I was like, I've done all this. And they're like, no, you have to do it every night. So there was, if you didn't, then you had to do it again. Of course, there's the temperature check. There was like 5 different points of entry, you know, before you actually walk in. And all of them took some time. And then you had to wait for your bags. And then, of course, you know, it's just and all of this is for the most righteous of reasons. I mean, this is exactly what we should be doing. 100% is this what we should be doing. And then there's just the mask, just getting used to walking around and everybody's masked up and you're getting hot in your mask. You're getting bothered by your mask. You want to pull it off. You want to, you know, you're judging your meeting, like the whole, I'm sure we've all been through it now, you know, there's no one shaking hands,
right?
You know, you might get an elbow bump or everyone's kind of, so, you know, it was just it was weird. I mean, it was super weird, you know? And then in my room, Chris and I could keep enough space to where I would take my mask off and then someone would walk in and I realized I didn't
put it on. Yeah.
It's just a weird time, you guys. Wow. It's just the weirdest thing. And, you know, artists would get up there and they go to check their mic with their mask on. And I'm like, take it off. We're not going to do that. And, but I mean, I will say I got used to it and I was so grateful to be there that it was okay, but it was jarring. It was like, oh, wow, this is where we are.
This is how it's going to be. Yeah, right.
This is it, at least for the foreseeable future. And I will say this, all of that stuff we're talking about is a gigantic expense. So we can only hope that when we get to whatever that safe place is, and once we start to feel comfortable that this world runs on money, maybe that's an expense they're willing to forego. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. Definitely not now. I mean, Jesus, you know.
I mean, you bring up a really valid point that I have kind of been having discussions with people about. It's like, part of the problem is that we're limiting people coming to shows, right? So now we're saying only, you know, whatever it is, I don't know now, 50% of the people can come now, which cuts tickets in half, and we're increasing costs by almost 50% you know what I mean? So it's like, it's out of whack. And, you know, the money people are going to look at this and say, this doesn't make sense, you know?
Yeah. And you know what? I actually take solace in that fact. I mean, you and I only touch on COVID, and I say we kind of still dance around it safely. I will say this, because there's so much money involved in what we do, as we're all trying to tell the rest of the world, hey guys, we're dying over here. We're also worth a ton of money.
Yes.
Right. There's 12 million of us. We make X billion dollars a year. I will say this, wherever there's that much money, there is the willingness to find a way to make all this work. And I take solace in that. I really do. I think they will figure out ways and find ways to make all this work. But the big thing here is just, it's eventually, and it's just not tomorrow, you know? So I was grateful to be in there. I was grateful for the hassle.
Yeah.
I'll take it for now.
Totally. I know I would too. It's like, I'm sitting here, you know, most days going, man, I would give anything to go do something. And I don't care how hard it's going to be. I'd go do it, you know?
Yes.
What I've always said, at least in the next few months, that like, you brought up a great point. There's super, super smart people, way smarter than me, trying to figure this out, right? And seeing that it is an industry that's hurting, that needs to work. It's also an industry that can make money. We're valid. We are, you know, we are not just an industry that doesn't need to happen.
Right.
But I think that if all of those smart people can't figure out how to do sports, then we're, you know, it's like, I'm using sports kind of as a gauge to see when we're going to go back to work. So it was particularly unsettling for me to see all of, you know, college football, you know, everybody just pretty much saying, nope, we can't do it. Because that means that the smartest people in the world can't figure out how to do it without a vaccine and without a, you know, whatever.
And that's it. You just said it. That's the qualifier, the vaccine, because sports are still, large scale sports are profitable enough without the crowd. We are not. By definition, that's the difference. We are not profitable enough without the crowd, you know? So the qualifier really is, that's the difference, is that vaccine, you know? So God, I tell you what in the world? I mean, just looking around the room with everybody in a mask, and it's like, what the fuck? You know,
what is happening? I know. Yeah. It's a
how
tricky
did we
thing.
get here?
I'm interested to see, you know, I saw something in Instagram the other day where they did a show in Europe, I think, where like everybody kind of had their own VIP platform that you couldn't leave.
Yep.
Like you pay for it, and there's 12 people in a little square, you know, like a VIP platform, and there's, you know, 20 of them or whatever everywhere. So it's kind of like drive-in, except that it's on platforms. And I thought, oh, that's pretty innovative. That's interesting. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I mean, and when I see that too, I'm like, I applaud the effort, and I don't mean that in I mean that in a very real way.
Oh, like,
they're trying to, because I too, when I see every one of those platforms, I'm like, expense, and the distance between them is lack of revenue. At least they're trying, you know.
Totally.
But you know, I will say this: aside from walking in and it just being super weird, walking back into a gig, you know, a lot of those guys, I'm at that PRG VER shop, like fortunately they haven't stopped working.
Yep.
You know, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of furloughs everywhere and with every company. But you know, they've at least been in their environment. I mean, me walking up the first day, I was kind of like, man, that's like sort of suck. I mean, I've been mixing at home a little, you know, you and I've been talking ad nauseum about this. We got together and did some stuff a few weeks ago, but to just getting back into it, it took a day. It took a day of kicking off the rust, you know?
Dude, I went up to Tater's place up there in Michigan to film some videos for Digico. That the last one that we did just came out yesterday. And I got in front of a console and I felt like I was the dumbest MFer on the planet. Like I'm standing there like,
yes.
I don't remember how to make this thing work at all. Like, you know, so I would imagine that finally, you know, when we do get back to shows, I'll be the same way. I'll, you know, walk up to a console after not being in front of it for 4 months and just go,
And we talked about this, like we're talking about how it was ultimately kind of easier and nicer and just mixing on near fields, you know, that situation coupled with 100 and whatever dBA coming at you in a room shaking, and that's going to be like, what? You know,
right? I know.
That's going to be the big eye opener of it all.
I think that at first we're going to have a lot quieter shows.
I know so.
People are going to fire it up and go, whoa, that's freaking loud.
Yeah.
Let's turn that down,
Yeah.
you know?
Totally.
But yeah. Cool. Was there enough about that COVID crap, whatever?
No, it's good.
No, it's good. I mean, you know, we needed to talk about it, but it's like, it's depressing and I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. So fuck that COVID stuff.
No, but I mean, okay. So was there any other experiences over the course of what happened that were either a bad experience or a good experience as far as, you know, dealing with the musicians or dealing, you know, any of that kind of stuff going on?
I would say the big thing, the thing that I kept thinking about, and again, I really did think, just because the bulk of heavy lifting that I've been doing, you know, I know you've got a few shows, you're so incredibly active, but this is kind of, I do a few things here and there, but this is like my main one. A lot of times it really made me think back just a lot of stuff that we talked about, and included in that were, you know, guys coming in with tracks where either it's like a bunch of mono tracks or it's, you know, with this thing being taped, there were some people there that were there with like a 2-mix track, but they knew the tracks were going to be dealt with later, but I still had to contend with it in the moment, you know, so there was a lot of that track nonsense that was bothersome, but I kind of understood. The biggest thing for me was after that first day, after I kind of got my shit together, you know, I'm the same mixer, and I told you how I'm doing it. It was paint by numbers. It was hit the marks, hit my presets. There's a mix pretty damn quick.
Sure.
Just variance in players, and because you and I, we harp how often we're in a place where we rehearse for months on end. We work on one act, several songs. This was back to like band. And you know how intellectually I know that the pieces are different, but sometimes like emotionally I'm like, oh, I'm struggling with this one. And I'm like, well, he doesn't hit that drum in the same spot every time. Therefore, it doesn't respond the same way. Don't go chase your EQ. It's him. Or the bigger thing, because this was in Nashville, a good portion of it was country stuff. And therefore, my dreaded, I talk about them all the time, acoustic guitars. I must have had a dozen different ones. And I swear to God, one of them sounded likable.
Isn't that amazing? You know, like, why does no one have a good sounding acoustic guitar?
It's just the quackery of all the electronics is often just so incredibly annoying. But we had one act. This one really stuck out. We had one act, and it was now it's one thing if you're mixing Slash and everything's on 10. That is kind of a vibe. Yeah. It's kind of a vibe. And is it annoying? Yes, but I get it. It's a high gain amp. It's kind of a vibe. Maybe you can gate it and it's low. Like
sure.
I get that. This is a show that's, yes, there were bass. Yes, there's drums. Yes, there was, I think, even keys and an electric guitar. So there's some like beefy stuff to kind of hide behind. But there was a dobro, nothing but buzz. There was a Mando, nothing but buzz. There was an acoustic, nothing but buzz. As soon as we pull them up, we notice them. They're not subtle. And as we get to talking, and I think they even had their own monitor guy, it's basically like, yeah, we chase this all the time. And I'm just, in my head, I'm going, how is this okay? Because, you know, so literally, so you know what happens when I push those, and you know those sources amidst the band have to really be pushed to get out. this, as soon as I pull those faders up, it's nothing but 3 times. And it's just like, guys, fix your shit, you know?
So how do we fix this? Because this is a common thread, you know, and it's certainly something that we've talked about, but I mean, it happens all the time. It's like people show up with shitty sounding stuff. You know, I've said this several times. I was a guitar player and a bass player when I was a kid, and I spent hours, you know, just as much time as I was practicing, I spent getting my tone right and getting it to sound right. And like, I was like, you know, if there was one little buzz or one pedal that was making some weird thing, like I traced it down. So I don't understand when guys show up with stuff like that. I guess they're just focused on their playing and don't care that their instrument is making that noise. I don't understand it. So I don't know how to fix it. Like,
I don't either. You know what a big part of it too is, like, if there's 6 guys in the band and maybe they have a monitor guy, that's 7 people. They're all used to it. They're just used to it. The other guys in the band are like, turn him down. The dude's got 1,000 other things that he's worried about. Guess what? It's not a big deal to them in their little world they live in, particularly if they're all in ears. Now, I mean, they're just, you know, so in their world, it's just not a big deal. But like, your world is then presented to, we're going to say, the masses. Yeah. Like, it's not just in your, oh, it's cool, I know it's their world, you know? And I think that's what happens. There becomes this hive mind sort of mentality of, oh, yeah, that's blah, blah, blah's rig, you know? And they forget that, like, no, but the point of this is to disseminate all of this information to a large number of people, and it's going to matter. So, like, we got to a point where I lived with some of these buzzes. I mean, it was bullshit. I'm like, low passing, notching, boosting in areas.
I've been there.
You know,
horrible.
I know, just to make it work. But then we'd get to like an acoustic thing, and I had them put mics on the stuff because, again, we could. I wouldn't be able to get away with it live, but we at least mic'd it up, because I'm like, you don't care now, but when this video that you just spent all this money on, when they go to mix it and it's you sitting there telling this touching story about the song you wrote for your grandpa, you're gonna care, you know. You're gonna care. So that was a big one to me. It was just the people, and there wasn't a ton of that. There really was, but when it was there, I'm just like, what the fuck, you know.
So maybe it is holding maybe holding higher standard to the traveling monitor engineer and the engineer that's with that band, instead of being like, maybe maybe all the other musicians in the band are like, you know, John's thing sounds like shit, he turned that down on my monitor, you know, whatever. Exactly. But maybe it's the job of the monitor guy to be like, this is unacceptable. Like, dude,
or the whoever engineer. Yes.
Yeah. Like, we need to deal with this. Maybe the way to fix this is not to go to the masses and the musicians and say, hey, you need to, you know, make sure that your sound is good. Maybe it requires every guy from the beginning of a band to hold a higher standard to their musicians and say, this is not acceptable. It's not going to work.
Yeah, totally.
Because that's obviously what's happened, right? You know, nothing against, I'm not talking shit about the guy that was with that band, but he gave up. He didn't, like, you know, he didn't keep going, hey man, we need to, you know, fix this. And I don't think that, certainly on a tour rig, I have never let it go. Like, I have had almost fist fights with backline guys because I've come at them for 4 or 5 days straight. Like, dude, you got to fix this. I don't care what you do, but we are fixing this. I'll help you, but you know, we're not leaving it like this. And I've had a backline guy be so frustrated because he can't figure out how to fix it that he gets mad at me for me coming at him so hard.
And then that's the whole thing of touring. Then that lingers, then that lasts, because you have to live with the person. It's so real, man. That's so real.
It's so real. But the point I'm trying to make is that I have never let it go. Like, I have never done an entire tour where there was something that was broken and not sounding right for the entire tour. Now, there may have been a week of me, battling with someone going, man, you got to fix this and I'll help you and whatever. But I never, I never let it go. And so that's, I think, I think that people need to do that. Engineers need to do that.
They should. And there's that feeling on all of those inputs too, that as soon as I pulled them up, it's not a ground, it's not and I always say it. I'm like, to do it, flip the ground, but I know
do it. That's not going to fix it. Yeah.
That's the your shit's fucked up sound, So that one, that stood out to me, was just the instances of those, again, of which there were not many. And if there's anything I love about working in Nashville, it's the quality of musicianship, the attention to tone,
totally,
all of that kind of stuff. Man, did I make some good vocals this week. But if there was one sort of sore spot, it was some of those buzzes.
That's amazing, dude. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, some of the younger acts, knowing that it was taped, some of the, we'll have blah, 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 fix it sort of mentality. That was prevalent with quite a few. Yeah. Even live, man. Even, people are so used to just having the performance fit. Like we talked a few weeks ago, it's like, they'll fix it. They'll fix it. They'll fix it. That's a bummer.
That's a bummer. Yeah. I mean, it's a sound, right? Like we've talked about this before, like auto-tune is a sound, and people get used to it. And so, both you and I have used auto-tune as an effects processor almost just to get the right sound. And that's because of exactly what you just described. So we've come up here on our hour, but is there any kind of last thing that you want to share with us about it? And besides the fact that it was, it was fun to go do a gig.
Real quick, let me just mention that I mentioned Chance, who put it all together. Superstar, thank you so much. Josh
Chance is great.
It's so great. Filet Mignon, Chris Diener, my spirit animal.
Filet, yeah.
Jason Swartz, Dave McMullen, and Kyle Shepard, and I'm sure I forgot other people. No, the only thing I would like to impart is when it felt after, I sucked for a day. Some of the acts made me feel like I sucked periodically, but when it was happening, guys, it feels the exact same. It's still out there. I know it's few and far between. I might not do that again all year long. God damn it, it felt good.
Yeah, good.
And to drive away with that feeling, it's out there. It's ours. It's gonna be. We'll get it again. Just
awesome.
It's still what you think it is.
Well, I'm glad, and I just spent the last hour living vicariously through you. So thanks for that.
I'm sure we'll trade places on this eventually.
Yeah. All right, cool, man. Well, hey, listen, guys, thanks for tuning in. We sure do appreciate you coming. 30 hours, man. That's amazing. Thanks for telling your friends. Make sure you hit like below and subscribe. Tell all your friends, and we'll keep doing this. Thanks a lot, guys. We appreciate it. Take care.
See you, everybody.